Josh, we can get going.
Great. Well, I welcome everyone and good afternoon. I am Josh Kelly. I'm the Solid Waste Program Manager at the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. And I'm also the Vice President of the Northeast Recycling Council. I'm standing in for the President, Megan Mansfield Pryor today from Maine DEP. And I just want to welcome you all here. We're really excited and delighted that you're joining us, that you're here to learn about building a diverse workforce for sustainable materials management. I think this is a really unique topic in a unique time. I'd first like to give a big thank you to our conference sponsors for which this event really would not be possible without your generous support. So thank you. To our networking sponsors, specifically the Association of Plastic Recyclers, ISRI, and Paint Care, and to our supporting sponsors, Resource Recycling, Waste Advantage, and Waste Management. I definitely want to invite folks to visit our virtual sponsor exhibit hall and learn more about each of these great organizations. And the link will be posted in the chat. But I also wanted to thank the NERC staff, including our new Executive Director, Megan Fontes, for bringing us all together today. And particularly thanks and recognition to Marianne Romolador for all the work she puts into these organizing these conferences, and specifically Robert Kropp for his assistance on the back end, keeping things running smoothly. We have a wonderful lineup of speakers for you today, and you can learn more about their professional experience by visiting their speaker bios on our website. Before we get started, please note this conference will be recorded, so please be sure to keep your microphone muted throughout the conference, whether you are joining by phone or computer, and we will send the link to the presentations and recordings upon the completion of the conference evaluation. So you need to send us your evaluation so that we can get you the recording. That's the key. I just want to note that NERC really appreciates your feedback on conferences as well. The NERC board takes that very seriously, as does the staff. Another note is to please make sure your name appears in the lower left-hand corner of your Zoom picture box. This is especially helpful for others to see who's here for networking, which is critical in these events. If your phone number is showing, please change it to your name now. And you can do this by hovering your mouse over the video inbox and selecting the 3 dots in the upper right-hand corner. Then select the rename option and enter your name and organization. So the 3 dots is kind of like the settings menu in Zoom. I've mentioned the chat box several times, so we will be posting information for you in the chat box throughout the conference, so keep an eye out on that for that. And the chat box is also where we invite you to submit your questions for speakers following presentation. So keep an eye on the chat and please use it. Engagement is really what NERC is all about.
Josh, can I intervene for a sec?
Please, yeah.
I noticed we had multiple people join with the name Fields Jackson. And I know for a fact we only have one real Fields Jackson. And we had a technical issue yesterday. I would ask anyone whose video box says Fields Jackson, and if that's not your name, to please change your name in your video so we know who you are. Thank you.
Like I see the real Fields Jackson is standing up. Well, the real Fields Jackson.
No, that's not the real Fields
Jackson.
Jackson.
Oh, that's not. that's Donald. Hi, Donald. There we go.
There he is. Thank you, Donald.
The only way I could find out which one is me of the Phil Jacksons is to open up the video so I could see which Fields Jackson is me and then change the name.
Thank you, Donald.
Oh, it's good to get off with a little bit of humor. All right, so Marianne, are we ready to kick things off? Okay. Well, with no further ado, now I'm happy to introduce the moderator for our first session, Creating Retention Strategies for an Inclusive Workforce. We have Charis Changala, Vice President of Sustainability and Public Affairs at Revolution. Charis, please take it away.
Thank you. And thank you all so much again for being here and for allowing me the opportunity to moderate today. We are excited about this session. And again, thank you so much. So today we're going to be talking, as Josh said, about creating retention strategies for an inclusive workplace. Fostering an inclusive workplace is crucial to retaining talent. Speakers will share tools and practices that boost employee engagement and build support for retaining employees. Examples include employee resource groups, work-life balance, and mentoring programs. So our first presenter is Whitney Cox, and she is with Schnitzer Steel, and she is the Equity and Inclusion Program Manager. Whitney, please take it away.
Thank you, Cherish, and thank you everyone who is joining today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick and I'll get started. Make sure I get the right screen here. It's always iffy on the first try. Okay, I hope everyone can see that okay. I'm getting some head nods. Perfect. Thank you. So again, thank you everyone for joining today. The topic of creating retention strategies for an inclusive workplace is an important one, and I'm happy you have all joined us to discuss this in more detail. My focus today will be on a potential structure that can be used by companies to assist in creating an inclusive workplace once employees are brought on. The first 90 days of employment are crucial. Psychology Today states that in 2018, 33% of employees left in the first 90 days of their job. That first impression that we create with employees when they walk in the door on their first day is critical in determining how long they're going to stay with the company. So to decrease this percentage of turnover at your company, a strong onboarding process that promotes inclusion and belonging is truly key. There's been a new Gallup report that said in 2022, a strong onboarding process and recognition can increase retention by 56%. At Schnitzer Steel, there are a few activities that we perform in the first 90 days that focus on inclusion. Those include, during the new hire process, sharing ERG information so employees can sign up right away. So if you can look at your screen, there is kind of a snapshot of what that is for us. We have a sheet that explains what the DE&I program is at Schnitzer Steel, what some of our goals are as a company, and then a breakdown of all of our employee resource groups and their missions. And then what's not really listed there is there's details below that of how employees can join. So that's always included when new hires are brought on board with the company. We also include any of our company culture training that we have done to date. So I'll explain a little bit more in detail on what that is later in my presentation. But basically any training you've done to set the stage for a new culture at your work, we have taken those and put them in with the safety trainings as a part of the new hire onboarding process. So our employees walk in and they understand from day one what the culture should be and what we're striving for, both for them and for our existing employees. Then we have a 30-day interview, and I'll share some more details on that in a few minutes, because that's actually something that is different, I feel like, that we do that maybe isn't done at other companies that really helps with inclusion. And then we have the 90-day review. So the 90-day review is pretty standard, I feel like, in all businesses. I'm not really going to do a deep dive into that one, but that tends to be that meeting that you have maybe on a quarterly basis between an employee and their manager that discusses performance, projects they may be working on, career development, things like that. And that one tends to fall in, again, to a quarterly, semi-annual, or annual basis going forward for employees. So more on this 30-day review. There are two additional statistics cited by teambuilder.com that say onboarding can improve retention by 82%, and 94% of employees would stay longer with employers who help them learn. So at Schnitzer, we feel that implementing this 30-day interview addresses both of those statistics and helps us with our retention. You can see a screenshot of kind of what that interview sheet looks like on my slide here. But we call this a new hire skip level interview, and it includes the employee, the HR business partner, as well as one level up management. So not the direct supervisor or manager, but a person above that. Questions during this interview tend to focus on how the company has been doing for the employee versus the other way around. So again, if you look on that sheet, you'll see more questions about how has your training been? Do you have all of the tools that you need? Different things that again are more the employee, us interviewing them on how they're their process is going for them and how the training is going for them versus me telling them that they need to do better. It's also good to note that this is not something that is done for all new hires. Example positions where this could be handy, and this may differ for every company, but could be leadership positions. It could be roles where you see a lot of high turnover, roles where you are trying to increase, or you have candidates coming in that are diverse that maybe before you didn't have that. And so you want to make sure that the process in place works for, you know, all the genders and all of the, you know, racial diversity that you're bringing into the department, since we all learn differently. And maybe you haven't looked at that in the past. This process in general for Schnitzer, we have seen that it has allowed us to gain valuable, actionable feedback for our team members on their experiences, which has actually resulted in a lot of changes in our onboarding and training process. We've been able to get some of the feedback on, you know, tools we have available, and maybe we give something out in English, or our yard has something that's only been in English, and we bring someone in who primarily speaks Spanish, and that was feedback we got. Oh, it would be better if you had this in Spanish as well. It would help me learn a little bit quicker. And so, you know, we started implementing, you know, more languages in that process. And employees are provided an opportunity to ask questions in this process as well, which again engages them a little bit more and sets them up for success for that 90-day review that they're going to end up having. So again, this is kind of the new different thing that we do at our company that we feel is really, really valuable to check at our onboarding process and help us make it better so we don't see people leaving, but also increase that inclusion and that engagement from our employee, because we're really showing in this step that their opinion matters to us. Now I want to highlight a few of the other programs and communication tools Schnitzer uses to increase retention and inclusion in the workplace. These don't necessarily fall in that first 90 days. They're something that we're able to do ongoing for our employees, and feel like they really, you know, again, make that continued feedback loop available and increase that inclusion and engagement. So Schnitzer has some educational programs that we have invested in that help us build a pipeline of diverse candidates. Those include the HBCU Fellowship Program, as well as the Schnitzer Academy. So the HBC Fellowship Program is a year internship. We started, you know, in the last year and a half, 2 years. And this was actually created in conjunction with ISRI's Sustainability Pathways Program. So I know Cheryl discussed this program in her speech a little bit yesterday, and it's also going to be covered more in the upcoming ISRI convention. But basically what we do is we find jobs or positions that we can create that would be available for fellows or people right out of college or a university. And we actually send those to the HBCUs for current students to apply for, and then they're able to take on those positions for 1 year after they graduate. So it's great for us because we're bringing in more diverse candidates and more diverse thought into the workplace to try to, you know, increase the amount of people who are interested in the recycling and, for us, the metals business. But it's also great for these students because they're getting a job right out of college, something that can help build their resume, help them determine maybe what path they want to go down in the future. And then we have the Schnitzer Academy, which, you know, is something that Schnitzer Steel created. And it's a partnership we have with local high schools, colleges, and technical institutes to offer educational resources and hands-on training for students that might be interested in moving into the metal recycling business. We have 2 locations currently where we're doing this partnership, and we're seeing a lot of success. In some cases, we're able to bring we'll bring students in and they can intern on site and do some work with us in the facility. Other times we're able to, again, you know, interview right out of that schooling and bring them into the facility right out of technical college or regular college or high school to take on some of the roles that we have available. Now I have some different communication tools that we use. So other communication tools that we utilize that we really feel like help increase inclusion and engagement at Schnitzer include a suggestion box, something we call CEO office hours, and we have an annual company-wide culture training. So our suggestion box, it's actually a digital box that we have made available, and it gives our employees an opportunity to share their ideas. This is something that is made available company-wide, again, because it's digital, so that gives us a really large footprint. So we actually pull the data every week. We track all of the suggestions we're getting. Any suggestions that are viable ones or ones that we're interested in seeing if they're viable, we do push forward to the proper groups. And then we feed back to our employees on a regular cadence to let them know that we're looking at these suggestions. If there's something that we're working on, we'll highlight that and let employees as a whole know that, we have something coming down the line from the suggestion box. If it's something we've implemented, we'll, again, let the company and the employees know if something new is changing in the tools that we have available, that came from a suggestion, to kind of continue pushing and promoting that feedback and that idea of share your ideas, we're listening. Our CEO office hours, that's something that occurs on a regular cadence, and we take a small group of employees and they're able to actually meet directly with our CEO via a Zoom meeting to ask any questions that they may have. And we've broken this up a few different ways. We used to do this regionally, so employees from different regions could participate, maybe by business unit, so metals. For us, the metals recycling, the mill, or pick and pull for our car bodies. So we might do it by business unit. We change up a little bit what we do every single time, but we've seen a lot of success out of this as well. And again, we're really showing that our employees are important, and sometimes we know that the communication can't go through the channels we hope it goes through because we're all busy and we don't always have time to do everything we want to do in a day. So this is another avenue for feedback and another avenue showing that we want our employees to engage and share their thoughts. And then we have that culture training. So for our culture training, past years have included defining diversity and inclusion, unconscious bias, the idea of what's the difference between equity versus equality. These are all trainings we roll out one a year, and we find a different topic that we want to focus on, and we make it mandatory for the entire company. And again, kind of going back to my first slide about new hires, this is something that once those trainings are completed, we put them in the new hire process. So new hires walking in the door can see the previous trainings that we've done. And then again, we build on them every single year. And we feel like these are really important because they bring the existing workforce where it needs to be for what we're seeing with new hires that are coming in, maybe directly from college or from other industries. And it also sets the stage for those new hires to let them know where we are as a company and what our culture is. So when they come in the door, they understand expectations, but they could maybe also be excited about some of the positive things that we're doing in the workforce that they may not have seen before. Now I want to step back and discuss the ERGs in a little bit more detail. So at Schnitzer Steel, our ERGs are employee-led and driven. They give the DE&I department and company leadership great insight into what we should be focusing on for select diverse communities, and they create a more inclusive and equitable workplace. With that in mind, we try to ensure that our ERGs are successful. So we've built a lot of structure around the expectations for our ERGs to make sure that they're the best they can be for our employees, but also that they can kind of help promote the message that we have internally. So how to set up an ERG. When we set up an ERG, we have a template that our employees must use when they want to create a new ERG, and that goes through an approval process. And that is, part of that is on the screen, so you can see that here. And it's anything from potential board members of the ERG and executive sponsors to what would your vision be, or what types of projects would you work on. We do this to ensure that our ERGs are going to have some consistent messaging and engagement. In addition to this, we actually also have a roles and responsibilities sheet that we've created. And in that, it explains all the different roles that should be on your board, what jobs fall under that board or that role, expected time commitment for those positions, so employees know when they're walking into this, what the expectations are there. In addition to that, there's also a tenure. So we ask that everyone participate for at least a year and then also help find their replacement. And then there are expectations for the ERG in general. So, certain amounts of communications per year are required to kind of keep pushing the message. And, we want to have a certain amount of projects also available. So not just events that employees can come to for educational purposes, but impactful, potentially culture changing projects as well. And again, we have just really found that building that structure for our employees when they want to initiate these ERGs helps ensure that the employees who are participating as members are getting regular communications and feel that engagement, but the employees who are participating as board members also are set up for success because they understand what they're walking into in the beginning, and they don't then step back and say, oh, this is way too much work for me. I didn't know this was coming. Another way that you can help your ERGs be successful once they are set up is to try to increase your frontline engagement. We've done this through recording any of the events that we we have made available, or any of the educational materials that we've made available, and putting them in our learning management system for our employees to watch after the fact if they're either frontline workers that don't have access to participate live, or if they're employees that maybe just had a conflict with another meeting. We've also made some text messaging capabilities available, so all of our employee resource groups can text their members communications, as well as sending out emails or any of the other communication chains we have. And we've just found that that gives us a broader audience, and that again may differ by business unit and by company, but finding different ways to reach your staff we found is key. Now I want to share a couple of our success stories from our ERGs to again just show you what could be available if you can build some structure around your ERGs and really try to help utilize the ERGs as well as the employees who are wanting to volunteer to participate in them. Our Hispanic ERG last year advocated for and facilitated the institution of a translating service partnership. So now we actually have one company that can provide live translations, and as well as recorded translations and written translations for all of our documents within the company. And this is something that we just found was a lot of people wanted translations, but they didn't necessarily have the time or the knowledge about how to go about it. Also, we were paying a lot of different companies to do translations for us. So by building an umbrella company that was able to service all of our sites, we're saving a little bit of money. So for locations that we're using employees in the yard to translate, we're saving some of their time. Then they can focus on other things, and we can get this third-party group to do our translations for us. So that was one thing that came about truly from our Hispanic ERG. They saw a need, they followed up, they did some pricing, and they presented to our DE&I department, and then up through HR and our board to get this program rolled out. We've also recently rolled out a mentorship program. So our ERG boards again found a need. People wanted to be mentored. They built out a program for what that would look like, and they're piloting our first round of mentorship partners currently, and we're seeing a lot of success there, and we're tweaking potentially to see what we need to do to release this company-wide in the future, or to continue piloting, as changes maybe are made. So now I want to talk a little bit about how you're tracking success. I feel like the final question a lot of people ask when they're implementing new projects or new programs or trying to make changes to culture, is how do you know it's successful? How do you know what you're doing is actually making an impact? So there are a couple of things Schnitzer does that I'm going to highlight. I feel like there's so many different ways you can answer this question, but I'll give you a few of what we're doing for you to take as some feedback or some thought and see if this would work for your company as well. We utilize external culture surveys and external recognition resources to see if we're making a difference. So we have Great Place to Work. So we work with them every year to do a certification, and they're a great organization to work with. They do employee culture surveys that you can do at a year cadence. They also have other resources made available to you once you start doing culture surveys with them to help improve your culture. We've certified with them for the last 2 years, and we're continuing with that program. And every year we get our results back. We look at those results and determine what we might be able to do to make a difference in key areas. And then again, we now have a result that the following year where we can look back and say, yes, we improved in this area after that project, or no, we didn't, let's change it up and try something different. You can also get recognition from different companies. So if you, again, look at the screen, we have the military friendly medallion there. That's something that you can sign up to receive recognition for. There are many organizations like this one that will recognize your company based on your hiring practices or your diversity statistics. And it can be helpful to get these recognitions so you can cast a wider net when it comes to trying to bring on diverse applicants for your positions. We also look to increase diversity across our networks, specifically in our leadership positions. In 2022, we were able to increase the diversity of our board. And now we are seeing 50% board members are women for Schnitzer Steel, and that exceeds the current average of 27.3%. So that's something we're really proud of. And again, the thought process there is that if we see more diversity in our leadership positions, that's going to trickle down into our employee base as well. Through our new hire practices, we saw the new hire percentage increase. So we have 22% women applying for our jobs and 49% ethnically diverse candidates coming in, which was definitely an increase for us year over year. And I want to state here, this does not mean that you just hire someone for the sake, that's diverse for the sake of diversity. This means that you're getting more qualified candidates in because of how you're recruiting, and that allows you the opportunity to bring in more diversity that's qualified. And then when you do that, again, we have panel interviews. So when you bring those candidates in, you make sure you have a panel of people interviewing them that is also diverse to make sure that any unconscious bias that might be at play is mitigated. So in closing, again, retention strategies for an inclusive workplace, they may vary by industry. They're definitely going to vary by company size and company objective. But statistics do show that the key to retention is diversity. So regardless of what you want to do and what you decide to do, I think it's pretty clear that we must all do something. Thank you.
Thank you, Whitney, so much. Very much appreciate that. We will be taking questions at the end of our next presentation, so please feel free to continue to put them in the chat. So thank you for that. And now I would like to introduce Mara Iverson. She's the founder, owner, and principal of Mara Iverson Equity Education and Consulting. Thank you, Mara. Please take it away.
Thank you. And thanks to Whitney for that really awesome presentation. That just makes me think right off the bat about the fact that diversity actually is a qualification in and of itself. And the reality is that a lot of us don't know to hire for qualities that we don't know we're looking for. And so I think that sometimes for folks who, you know, are used to like, well, we know who works well in our culture, or we know who works well in our workplaces, or we know what the profile looks like. You don't know what you don't know. So if you really work on that like hiring diversity element, you ultimately end up learning what pieces people may have that you didn't even know to look for and put in your qualifications or your wish fors. So awesome leaping off point. That said, it kind of leads directly into what I'm talking about, which is going to be specifically the day-to-day retention pieces that you can use. I'm going to give you 2 tools in the time that we have. There are dozens. In the chat, I'm giving you a link to the ones that I'm talking about. So they come from a place called the Management Center, and I like them because they are DEI oriented. So let me just share with you my thrilling PowerPoint. So what I want to start with is this concept of choice points. One of the things that's true about hiring and retaining diverse talent is that we tend to do things the way we have always done them, especially if they're ways that we were taught to do them, and especially if they're ways that feel like they are just the right way to do them in the first place. The key is to kind of try and identify opportunities you have where you make choices. This is particularly valuable for people who oversee other employees. Anytime you're making choices, you have the option to either go down the autopilot, the way we have always done things path, which will result in the status quo, or you have the option to pause, ask questions, and seek alternatives, which ideally sets you on a path toward more conscious choice making, more equitable practices, and ultimately better outcomes for your company, for your organization. There isn't, however, a neutral path. There isn't a, well, if I do nothing, there is no bad impact, because the choosing to do nothing route is the autopilot path. So it is choosing a path. There isn't a neutral. There's choose to not do anything or to continue as things are. And there's choose to question, analyze, and wonder. I'm listing for you some common choice points, places where we frequently make decisions at work. We make them around relationship building, and I have that highlighted because I'm going to offer you a specific kind of case study example as to how you would use this choice points idea there. But we make choices, we make decisions when we're setting goals, when we're delegating work to people, when we're hiring, when we're doing our day-to-day check-ins with our supervisees or our supervisors. We do it when we develop people, when we invest in professional development and in skills development. And we absolutely do it when there are performance problems or challenges that we need to address with somebody. So these are common places where we know choices are being made. And so we can think about how are we structuring those choices and what could we do differently? So here is a little bit of a walkthrough example. The key is to kind of go through the steps and ask these questions with the goal of teasing out the places where you sometimes are on autopilot, or just do things because you're trying to get them done quickly because there's infinite work on most of our plates. So first, you have to know what you want in the first place. And then the questions you ask are, what's the current approach that we're taking to try to get the desired outcome that we're working toward? And what's the result? Are there unintended results that are coming from the way that we do things now? And if there are, what do we want to see instead? So now that you know your outcomes, you can think about, well, where are your decision-making opportunities, and how can we bake equity and inclusion into them? So those questions might look like, okay, well, where do I make decisions regularly? Those might be some of the pieces that I just showed you, places where you regularly make choices and decisions. What's your default path or your autopilot choice? What do you typically do? What's your structure? What's your plan? What's your approach? And answering all of those questions gets you ready for the next step, which is you examine your choices and any of the unintended consequences that come with them. So who in your company benefits from the way things are being done now? Who might be burdened, disadvantaged, left out by the way that things are being done now? Once you've got answers to that, you brainstorm alternatives. So you think about what are the other options that might lead to more equitable results. Now there's kind of a catch-22 here, and that is that people who design the processes often have our own biases. So we sometimes bake in our biases to the new approach. If you think about something like right-handedness, for instance, if a bunch of right-handed people are designing a classroom, they'll often forget to add left-handed desks or left-handed scissors, not because they don't care about or know about the existence of left-handed people, but because they're so used to the world kind of being built for them in a really common way that it just doesn't always occur to people. But if you've got left-handed people on staff, they're going to let you know this is a common place for pitfalls. You're going to want to order some different chairs, some different scissors. And then once you've tried putting new things in place, acting, you want to evaluate. So you find out if the thing that you did led to the new desired results, and was there an impact on equity and inclusion? And the thing is that this is really a cycle. So it goes over and over and over again. We often make shifts that need to be refined over time, and that's okay. It doesn't mean we didn't do it well the first time. It just means humans are really good at getting better and better and better over time when they take the time to learn from the choices they make. So let me give you an example in that relationship building place. Let's say we think about who on your team, who among your colleagues gets feedback from you, and how do they get that feedback? You might think about, like, who do I talk to specifically in check-ins? Who do I casually talk to if I'm grabbing a cup of coffee somewhere, or if I'm microwaving my lunch, right? You think about where are the places that we give feedback, the places that we help one another to develop. You can think about who then receives that. So you might notice that you give more frequent and specific feedback that's like positive and critical and can help people develop and get better to people that you're more comfortable with. Sometimes that's people who share your interests or share some of your identities, or, you know, just feel like they're easier to be friendly with. The result is that the people on your team who maybe aren't as similar and who maybe don't have close relationships with you may be missing opportunities to grow that the people who get your feedback are receiving. So this is the place where you go, okay, that's a decision I'm making. I'm making choices about who I give feedback to. Now that I know that's a place that I'm doing that, how can I make my feedback more equitable? So who needs better and different feedback? How can I get it to them? An option that they offer here is, well, okay, we have check-ins in place. I could structure a checklist where I know that every month I am checking in two-way feedback, which means I'm getting information from my colleague as well as giving information to my colleague with all the members of my team or with all of the people who are in my division or whatever subdivision makes sense for you depending on the size of your teams. And hopefully the goal is that you start seeing more growth from your staff across their identities, across their positions. That's the goal. And if that is the goal and you don't see that happening, you might have to rewind and think, okay, what about my strategy doesn't seem to have resulted in meeting the goal? And what can I shift to make it better and different? So that's an example of how to use choice points as a way to day get out of autopilot mindsets that tend to benefit the same people over and over and start to think about new ways of doing things that might benefit people more equally. I'm going to give you one more tool. This is a tool that's called PTR, or Preference, Tradition, and Requirement. And it's just a tool to frame your thinking. The purpose of it is to think about, like, when you have requirements or when you are asking someone to approach a task, are you inadvertently adding pieces that ultimately benefit one specific way of doing things or one specific culture's way of doing things? So here's a great example. You might think about, I think sometimes about, like, the people who work in development offices, who maybe their job is to fundraise in some way. Maybe they have always handwritten thank you notes to donors or supporters or people who contribute to them. That might be something that they learned from their mentor 20 years ago. It might be something that they were taught at home from a family member. And so they have a preference for that being the way that we engage with people we have gratitude for. But that's a preference, not necessarily a requirement. Sometimes things are also a tradition, like, well, we've always done it that way. We've always handwritten thank you notes to people who contribute, people who help. Tradition is also not a requirement. The requirement might be we need ways to engage with people who contribute to and support us that will encourage them to contribute and support again in the future. That's the requirement. That's the goal. So we can think about creative ways to reach that goal that might not be the same handwritten notes that we've always written. Another example that I have here on the screen is, let's say that you are thinking about how you make sure people on your team have the information they need at any given time to be doing the jobs they need to do. You may prefer that they get you updates in writing and that you give them updates in writing. That's a preference. For some people, written communication like that isn't as helpful as something like maybe a phone call might be, or having a dialogue, a conversation out loud. Sometimes we have a process in place that says, like, every week we're going to do updates and they happen by email. Again, there may be some folks who are like, actually, if I had something that were written down from you in your handwriting, that for my brain wiring makes it easier for me to see this as something that needs to be applied, right? So in both of those cases, preference for how you do things or tradition, the way we've always done them, might not work well for everyone. So it might be useful to think about instead, what's the goal? Is the requirement all of my team members have the information they need to make decisions, they feel connected to one another and to me, they feel like they can collaborate? If that's the case, what do we need to do to reach that goal? Well, it might be that we need a Slack channel. It might be that we need in-person meetings. It might be that we need a phone call update. Sometimes this means adding a few extra steps to your process. Sometimes it'll mean streamlining it and taking out things that don't seem to work for anyone. But the key of PTR is to think about taking out the things that might be our personal preferences that we sometimes think are requirements, or things that are just traditions that have been passed down that don't have to be the only way that we do things. And instead, we boil it down to, what's the goal? What's the requirement that I need moving forward? And those are two tools from the Management Center. They're actually from a much larger training that I do, where I give lots of tools and examples and chances to do actual work with the tools. And you're welcome to contact me if you have questions for how to use them. And that is it for me.
Thank you, Mara. Very much appreciate your presentation as well. Thank you, and all the energy with it as well. So please continue to put any questions you have in the chat box. And if I could ask that Whitney also have her camera off, we'll go ahead and kind of ask you both some questions, okay, if that works for you. All right, so starting with Whitney, we did have a question do you have a unionized workforce?
We do work with unions. So approximately 75% of our hourly workforce is unionized. We meet with them and with our union leadership on a regular basis, and we do share any internal programs with them. So our DE&I programs, our Schnitzer Academy programs are explained to our unions. And so far, they've actually been really supportive, particularly with the Schnitzer Academy work that we do, because that brings trained people, not just to us, but to the unions as well. So it seems to be a win-win.
Oh, that's great. And have they embraced things like with apprenticeship programs too, like apprenticeships that's been received well?
Yeah, so far the fellowship program is still fairly new to us, and we've had a couple, people who have been brought on for a year, and they tend to be more office positions. They have not been unionized roles yet. I think we'll see how that changes maybe as time goes on. But again, they've been so supportive so far. I imagine that we'll see support in that area as well if it makes sense for everybody.
Okay, great. And another quick question for you, Whitney. Your suggestion box, is it completely anonymous?
So it is anonymous, but there is an option to put in your information. So it's roughly 5 questions. The first 4 are optional: line of business that you work with. Since we have 3, we want to see if we can narrow down the suggestions a little bit for implementation. Employee name and number if you want us to call you back, and then the suggestion. And shockingly, quite a few people actually put their information in, which I do think has led to the success of our program, because we are actively trying to implement some of these suggestions. And when our employees put their name in there, we're able to call, we're able to actually do some follow-up and do some brainstorming about what we're wanting to do with a suggestion to see if, maybe my line of thought matches up with what they're looking for, so we can move forward properly.
And have you found, like, when you do these suggestion boxes, do you come back to like the entire team? Not that you would spell out what employee asked or whatever or suggested, but you definitely let everyone know, hey, we've got these suggestions, this is what we're doing, so they feel confident in using this box.
Yeah, absolutely. So we you're right. We kind of truncate what we share. We don't share all of the details and stuff of who's sending in what, but we will share, I would say, any actionable suggestions. Just like anything, sometimes you'll get complaints that I don't think need to be shared with the group, but any actual suggestions that we get, we share with the team. We let them know when we're working on trying to implement, or if there's something that just doesn't make business sense, we still get some kind of answer together as to why that might be the case, and try to share that information as well. Okay,
great. And Mara, for you, do you have any strategies you can share for prioritizing minority-owned businesses?
I do. And I don't know if that one's maybe also for Whitney, but something that I think a lot about is that most states maintain a disadvantaged business enterprise or DBE list. And that's publicly available. So if you go looking for a service that you need, maybe you're looking for paper elimination of some sort from your office. Maybe you're looking for accounting services externally, or even, like a service more than a product, those sorts of things. A state's disadvantaged business enterprises list will tell you not only who does what you need, but also what identities that they hold, and you can do some prioritizing. You can think about like where you're located. Are you maybe looking specifically for a Black-owned business because you know that in your area, Black folks make up a bigger percentage of the population than you seem to be working with, and you specifically want to work on that. Or maybe you specifically want to work on women-owned businesses. So that can be a place that you can go to target. And one of my recommendations would be to start thinking about your process as a lot of times we have bids, or we kind of send our opportunities out to a network that is a network that's already known to us. And it tends to contain our biases. So yeah, if you look in different places than you normally look, and even pinpoint ask people or send them like, this is an opportunity that I saw, it might work well for you, you will definitely elicit different responses.
Thank you. And Whitney, did you want to add anything to what Mara had said on that question?
I like Mara's reply. I feel pretty good on that one. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. No, great. And so Mara, you talked about, and that was such a great example of the left versus right. And thank you for just drilling it down to something very simple for us to relate to. So thinking through those steps, you said, what's the best approach to incentivizing adapting to new system if there are different preferences among teammates? Like you talked about email versus chat and things like that. So
that's a really great question. To be honest, one of the things that I think helps with the incentivizing is trying to think about what the goals everybody wants to meet together are, and then think about how you can reach them. It is not, in my experience, super helpful to say, everyone look for your preferences and take your preferences out of things, right? Like, because first of all, a lot of people can't tell their preferences from the requirements. They're like, this is how I like it done, so this is how it has to be done, right?
Right.
And even if they have that support or that self-knowledge, that doesn't necessarily feel incentivized. I like to receive information this way. My job is hard and I don't want it to be harder, right? If the incentive is my job is hard and I don't want it to be harder, nobody wants to make a change. If the incentive is we want something to be easier, or we care about opportunities getting to more people, or there are some folks that we want to retain, maybe it's like people who are within the first 5 to 7 years of their career. And we know that their way of communicating doesn't seem to be the same as how we've always done it. And we are hearing grumblings that maybe they want to shift. If the incentive is you want to keep them, then the chances you converse with them about maybe what's working, what's not working, and talk to them about what your goals are and work with people to make strategies for how to reach them. That would be my, because individual personal incentive is really hard for getting people to break away from, preferences and traditions, but collective goals, that sometimes can be what helps us to move toward identifying what a requirement really is.
Thank you. That is helpful. I can speak in personal experience at our company. We tried emailing and texting and did both, and then all of a sudden you have people say, "Well, why did you send it to me both ways?" So it is funny how it's just adapting to changes in what works. So going back to Whitney, if you don't mind, you talked about the ERGs, employee resource groups, and you mentioned the Hispanic group, which was great, the projects and getting ideas. So how difficult is it for you to set up and continue to offer these groups? The Pride group or the Hispanic group, you know, whatever groups are continuing to be added, if you could speak to that to help others.
Yeah, I mean, I think we currently allow all of our employee resource groups to meet on company time. And we also allow them to have any events that are occurring on company time. So the idea that someone's going to have to do something outside of work isn't there. And because we have, and I'll stress this, it's key, we have executive engagement that allows us to navigate a lot. I think if your leadership is not engaged, you're going to have a really hard time of getting people below them to engage, because they're not going to see that importance or feel like they can maybe share their opinions. But if your leadership is on board with what you're trying to accomplish and shares that in, you know, whatever cadence of meetings that they have, or they engage, and so people see through their actions that this is important if it's important to them. I think that's really key. We're actually currently setting up 2 new ERGs this year. And so we are able to continually add ERGs as employees see the need. Again, this is employee led and driven. So, you know, I don't sit here all day thinking of ERGs and trying to recruit people. Usually the spark comes from an employee saying, why don't we have this ERG? And I'll say, that's a great idea. Do you want to lead that? Let's build a business case. And then I can support from that side and kind of help move them along. And then I saw that question about budgeting as well. We had 0 budget for the entire DE&I department for the first, I think, 2 years. So everything we did was in-house, and it was on, you know, donated time, or we would build a training and it would be our internal IT team that was building it for us, or we were adding on to someone else's training because we didn't really have a budget to do that. And I think through that the first, you know, strenuous couple of years where we had no budget, we were able to show success through employee engagement and show the desire to continue. And then just like any other business or any other department, we built a business case to get money and showed how that money would help us reach farther and do more. So I think it really, though, even there, you know, it's executive engagement. And that's the key to any culture change in a company, because this is truly what it is. DE&I and ERGs are there to shift the culture. And so if your leadership doesn't want to shift the culture, you'll have no success. If they do want to shift the culture, you know, you can build a business case of how this would help get them there.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that. And I think it relates to when we were talking about the feedback question and the anonymous feedback, but also through the ERGs, I would think sometimes it comes up too, is what tips do you have, both of you have, for employees who want to provide feedback that's uncomfortable to bring up? Like, how does that work?
Yeah.
Or what would you recommend?
Definitely. I'll start on that one. One thing we stress with our employee resource groups and our DE&I department is that it's a safe space. So this is a safe space to bring your ignorance forward. It's also a safe space to say you don't like how someone's talking to you, you know, maybe saying Black versus African-American. So we really stress that everyone who's engaged, whether it's someone who's a part of the minority group or someone who's an ally, you know, is allowed to ask, you know, honest, you know, open questions to help start a dialogue that can help us then create content that'll be available for the rest of the company. I think if you don't have a safe space, if you don't have people who are engaging with each other, you're not going to get there. But I think that is imperative to success, because again, if we want to change the culture, we have to be able to have these uncomfortable conversations. And that comes from both sides.
And I would add on directly to what Whitney just said there, that like that trust culture is critical. It's the cornerstone. And the people who get to decide whether there is a culture of trust and there is a culture of safety are the people who are in the minority or who are disadvantaged. The people who have identities that are commonly accommodated or that are more represented are not the ones who get to decide whether the space is safe. And the reason that is that for people who typically have been, people think about their comfort, people think about their needs, they may find discomfort to be unsafe when it is not in fact unsafe. It's just that there's so little discomfort for a lot of folks with more, you know, a little bit more power, a little bit more control, that they don't know what unsafety feels like. But the people who often don't have the power, don't have the control, don't have the opportunities, do know what unsafety is. And the likelihood is that if we're having a conversation about whether something is safe, the key would be to check in with people who experience safety less frequently, so that we don't end up defaulting to anytime things are uncomfortable, they're unsafe.
Mara, that is such a great, oh, sorry, Whitney, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to build on that, yeah, there's a great TED Talk called Calling In Culture. And it's all about that. It's about the idea of, you don't call people out and say, and say, hey, I can't believe you did that. It's calling them in and saying, hey, I really like working with you, but I do find that term offensive, and here's why. And again, the diversity at your work needs to be comfortable sharing that. And so you have to build that safety. You need to really stress this is a safe space, probably do some team building to get people there where they can start talking about this. And then you can get some really interesting topics. One thing, we have an employee resource group that does podcasts, and it's our Black Employee Network, and they actually sent that question out there. They want to do a podcast on the questions no one wants to ask. And so they sent a survey out. What are you uncomfortable asking your coworkers? Throw it in here, and we'll start answering these questions, because they know that, it's that group is comfortable enough to open the door and to maybe get some of these comments that are potentially inappropriate, but for them, because they're at that point as a group and we're at that point with the culture, they know it's coming from maybe a place of ignorance or a place of just, not knowing, and they want to answer in good faith and help build and change the culture.
And Whitney, is that podcast within your company? So that's just like a private, for your company?
Yeah, we do like an employee-led podcast, and where we interview other employees. So it's kind of a building, what we see within our people.
Oh, okay. And Mara, what you were saying on the same, area, it was about like the safe and unsafe and getting, which, obviously makes sense. How would you recommend a company finding the people that they can ask? So if you're a leader and you're trying to figure that out, and maybe there are people that feel a certain way, but they're not comfortable, right, in expressing that, how do you recommend they reach that person or people and get that response?
I think trying to have a few different processes in place to collect information is probably a good idea. So one of them could be, as Whitney mentioned, the suggestion box, and trying to make opportunities for people to get questions to you or concerns to you in an anonymous way. Whatever that looks like for your particular organization, find a way for people to get information to you anonymously, so that there aren't any costs to someone giving feedback that people might not like receiving. Because whether we like it or not, sometimes there are costs, and the costs are, well, then we're not going to fire you, but we might not invite you out for drinks after work. And there's a real impact to that stuff too, right? So places for anonymous feedback, an out loud recognition of the fact that sometimes feedback does come with consequences, and you recognize that. Sometimes it can really just be comforting to people to hear someone say out loud that they are not nuts for experiencing that sometimes when they raise a problem, there are nasty consequences for them, because a lot of us don't recognize that an icky consequence has happened in the first place. And if we do recognize it, we don't want to talk about or acknowledge it. And that honestly makes people, I can speak for myself as an LGBTQ+ person. When I've occasionally raised something that's been like, hey, you call your policy a maternity leave policy, but like, I think a lot about gender, and not everyone who needs those policies is a matern, right? Like, and then, all of a sudden, the casual people who wanted to hang out and talk with me at work just dropped off. And when I mentioned it to my supervisor, they were just like, I don't know what you're talking about. That's not possible, right? Like, people aren't treating you differently. And it really can impact your sense of wellness. And your sense of confidence in your bringing your experience, which is valuable, right? Like you can't even pay for the kind of experience that people can bring that way. They're less likely to offer it to you in the future if they feel like there's no recognition that sometimes it's a risk to bring it to you in the first place, and that their experiences in the past are valid, and that they can also talk about experiences they have this time. it doesn't fix everything, but for a lot of people, just the transparency that sometimes stuff happens in a way that we didn't intend and we need to go back and fix, can mean that somebody feels more willing to lean into your process, knowing that you might be willing to fix it if there's a mistake.
And what you just said about someone saying, well, that's not possible, but that is how you feel. And there is that where, you know, people may get feedback and say, right, or for whatever that is. So you may get both. People really take it to heart and others don't. So how do you, we have a question here about how do you really promote and create that inclusive environment, especially like with what you just said, Mara, like how do you get past that? And how do you grow? And as you know, some companies are further along on this than others, but like, you know, what would you recommend? And Whitney, I'll ask you as well on this question.
I would say a first step is if you have people who are, you know, to be in your organization, folks who are willing to give feedback, try working with those people first, people that you know are already willing to speak up, and do what you can to listen to them and make changes based on what they say. Watching the follow through usually provides a sense of safety to some other people that says, I watched feedback result in change. I watched feedback not cost somebody, but instead result in a better workplace, right? So if you start with people who are already willing to talk with you, one caution I would say to just think about, there's not a great way to root it out, just good to be conscious. A lot of times the people with, you know, traditionally like disadvantaged identities who continue to survive, especially for long periods of time in a place, sometimes the reason they do that is that they are much more willing than other people to put their needs to the side or to focus on doing things the way that like the majority of people want to have them done. So just be aware that like, I would say go looking for the feedback from people you disagree with their feedback and see what happens. Not just people who have, you know, disadvantaged identities, but who say everything's fine, because that can be a temptation. Just go talk to the people who have disadvantaged identities, but they say everything's fine. Instead, talk to the people who you're like, I don't think I agree with that. They're already giving you the feedback, so you're not trying to get it from someone who doesn't feel safe or okay yet. And then what stretch would it take to believe that what they are telling you is true, and what can you make changes on based on that? Try to make that process as transparent and easy to see happening as possible so that you get the benefit of people understanding that that's something that really can change. I say it like it's all easy. It's not easy, obviously.
No, thank you. And Whitney, thank you, Mara, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing in addition to what Mara has said, you know, is show people that it's important to them. So I get that a lot also. I think many of us do, especially in our industry where we're not necessarily where the rest of the world is when it comes to culture and DE&I. I prove that them, and this almost answers, I think, another question that I see in there. I prove that this is a part of their job. So there are direct correlations statistically between, you know, retention and turnover. So people who leave in 90 days. Well, people in that 90-day range also have more safety incidents than anybody else. And then there's cost associated with these safety incidents. There's also cost associated with training people, with recruiting people, with interviewing people. And so I think if you can get your quantifiable number for your company and say, hey, we can increase our retention and our engagement of our staff, we're going to see, you know, 50% more people stay with us, and that's going to decrease our new hire costs. That's going to decrease our safety incident, you know, payouts for injuries. That's going to decrease all of these numbers, you know, and here, you know, here's the data to prove it, because the data is there. I mean, it's Harvard Business. You can Google almost anything you want, and colleges and think tanks are showing that, you know, increased engagement at work and increased diversity of thought at work increases productivity, increases, you know, profit. decreases turnover. And so I think you can really get those numbers together and see which one is the most engaging and the most impactful for your business. And you build that case and say, you know, you think culture isn't a part of your job's operations. Great. Well, just like you have to be safe to operate, you need to think about culture to operate. These are interwoven. It's a braid. You need all three at once to be successful, because again, your operations will suffer if you have turnover. Your safety is going to suffer if you have turnover. Here's the work, you know, the proof. And I think you can build it that way as well. I will also state that, you know, we kind of have a motto in our department, and it's meet people where they are. You know, we have an aging workforce. We also have a lot of open jobs and not enough people, you know, applying for them. We don't want to get rid of our staff, but we want to educate our staff. And so we have taken a lot of this from that education stance. And we have kind of varying education available for our frontline workers and our, you know, hourly or office employees versus our leadership. And we kind of elevate what is made available based on that. So, you know, here's your training on unconscious bias. Here's your training on unconscious bias as a leader and how you can impact it for everybody else. And so we, you know, we try to build that together as well to help push the point home again of why it matters for that manager. And that seems to, I mean, I don't think there's any one thing that works, but that seems to be working so far for us.
Thank you for that. And along that line of just giving some examples, Mara, I don't think yet, I'll have to double check. Someone asked if you have any film, like the forms for the PTR forms, if there's any that you can provide as just examples for folks to use. So if you have anything like that, resources that you could share.
Yeah, I think if you follow the Management Center link that I put in the chat, their resources are plentiful and free, and they have lots of really good examples there. And if you want to reach out to me individually, my contact information is on my website. You could just say like, hey, I was in the NERC conference and I was wondering about examples, because I have a few of them written out, but they're sort of like buried. And I can go grab them for you if you want that info.
Thank you. And I know we have just a few minutes left. And so just in these last few minutes, if I could ask you both just to think about, if from this session, if someone was going to take just one thing, like if they were going to take one thing with them to move forward with, what would you like them to take? I know there's so much, but if you could give one. Mara, do you want to start, or Whitney, either way?
I think just start the conversation. You know, if this is new to your company or something where you feel like you've tried to start and you've had to stop, or you've hit roadblocks, start the conversation again and come with the figures. I spent the first 7 years at Schnitzer in operations, so I feel like I look at things a little bit differently sometimes. And if you're trying to engage your operational leadership as to why this is important, just to get your foot in the door, you know, you need to have numbers, because that tends to be the way that operational people think. So that's it.
Thank you.
And I would say, you know how Whitney said, like, the data is there, you could look at the Harvard Business Review, et cetera. The data is also there within your company. Even if you're not collecting it, the data is there. Sometimes it's in the form of feedback. Sometimes it's in the form of feedback that people haven't even given to you yet, or may not feel comfortable giving to you. But whatever the feedback is, whatever the data is, even if it's uncomfortable, start by trying to believe it, which can be hard. You know, sometimes, especially if you're like, Harvard Business Review says so-and-so people tend to be unsatisfied with their jobs, but that's not been my experience. Set your experience aside, assuming that probably you haven't talked to every single employee or about every single topic, and start with trying to believe the thing that people say needs fixing, even if your observations don't match, because that's actually how we often, there's lots and lots and lots of research that says that that's often how we stop ourselves from making change, is we think like, well, that's not something I've seen, so it mustn't be real. And then you don't make change based on data that you do already have, because it doesn't match the experience of some people. Try to put the energy of believing into the data that's actually coming, that's actually representing the voices of people whose voices don't get heard very often.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. This has been such a great session. We could keep talking for hours, it seems, on this, but I know, Marianne, we're at our time. And so I'll turn it to you. And thank you again, Mara, Whitney, again, for these sessions. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you all. That was a great session. Lots of examples, tools, and ways we can make the change no matter what type of place of work we have. Thank you all so much for that. I want to just alert people to the fact that we are going to move into a 15-minute break. I want to encourage you all to visit our virtual sponsor exhibit hall. The link is in the chat box for you to find there. And in 15 minutes, we'll come back for our last session. Thank you all. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to start our last session of the day. This will be a two-part session, and we have Robin Ingenthran, who is the CEO and founder of Good Point Recycling, and Robin will moderate the session. Robin? You are on mute, Robin. Robin, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I'm trying to screen share and I've got the wrong screen.
We can see the questions. There, we could see the questions.
Okay.
Yeah, it just wasn't in share view.
Okay. So first, let me say thank you for the invitation. As Marianne said, my name is Robin Ingenthran, and I've been off and on a member or attendee of NERC conferences since 1992. I was pleased to be invited by Meg and Marianne to participate in NERC's DEI committee, which was set up last year. And I've been learning a lot from that committee as we go. While I was mentioned as CEO of Good Point Recycling in Vermont, Massachusetts, but today I kind of feel like I'm appearing or attending in a different role, which is as a member and founder of Fair Trade Recycling, which is an organization founded in 2007. It has members in several continents in emerging markets, primarily electronics recyclers. And we have been playing a role to act as kind of an anti-defamation league for some of the Africans, Chinese, et cetera, who have been profiled wildly in the Western press. What we're about is making sure that reporters have a chance to speak to them directly and let them tell their own stories in their own voices. Today, I've been asked to just explain that everybody's going to be broken out into 6 or 7 small groups to talk about the questions that I'm sharing here. Each of you will have your own moderator, and you'll be asked to share one thing from this conference that you're excited to take back to your own organization. What is one way that you can bring these learnings back to your organization? And are there DEI initiatives happening in your workplace that you feel are extremely effective that weren't covered during the conference? And are there other topics or programs for the conference that you would like more information about? And I would encourage everybody in their own groups to come up with other things too. Maybe talk about things that don't work as well as those that do. And I'll look forward to meeting people, and hopefully everybody will put your cameras on so we can have a nice chat. That cover it, Marianne?
Yep, that's good. And I will open all of the rooms now.
Thanks.
Ooh, I think we're good to begin, Robin.
Okay. So I guess we're all returning from our groups. Were you one of the moderators, Marianne?
No, I wasn't. It was Josh Kelly.
Okay. So Josh, why don't you start?
All right. We spent a good amount of time on the first question and maybe the last question. So on things we're excited to take back from the conference, we discussed a quote it's actually a quote from Blake Morris, but it was during the presentation with Cornell Wright yesterday. And the quote is, "An optimized team rarely looks the same." And so Theodore and my group, Theodore Higgins from the city of LA, is feeling like, there's so much packed into that, and that bringing that statement, that quote back to sort of other leaders in his organization might help sort of make the case for, I see it sort of as making the case for DE&I initiatives or changes. The other thing we discussed was Mara's presentation today, where she shared the three PT&R, preference, tradition, and requirement kind of paradigm, where she discussed really that the requirement is essentially like the goal that you're trying to reach. And I guess we talked about how you may need to let go of certain preferences or traditions in order to reach that. And my version of that, which reminds me of supervision, is that I'm very particular about certain ways things are done, or I can be, and I realize that I really have to focus on the goal and not how I would do it. I mean, it really doesn't matter specifically how it gets done, and everybody brings their different strengths to their job and their tasks, and they can get things done in different ways. So if you can realize that, if you can bring that awareness, supervision, and focus on the goal rather than how to get there, I think you give people a chance for ownership, buy-in, and for different strengths to come out from different individuals. And I see that as a similar analogy to this, really focusing on the goal. And then for the one that was important for me is Schnitzer Steel. I've seen them present before on their employee resource groups. And it's a fascinating idea. And I just keep thinking about how to implement that, or if there's a little bit of a chicken and an egg, do you have to have the people that want to form the group before you form the group, or do you form the group so the people will come? Like, I don't know all of this, but I know that, not being a particular minority myself, I can imagine how hard it is to be going into an organization without a culture that you feel belonging with. So if you feel that these groups really help you immediately, have people like you to chat with and to commiserate with. So that's the feedback. We did talk about a little bit about taking things away, and Marianne, help me with that part. Was there, we ran out of time essentially, but those are some of our big takeaways.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about XLEAP, and Theodore had some trouble accessing it because of his workplace firewalls, I guess, that wouldn't allow him into the system. So it brought up a good point, because I wanted to let everyone know that during that session where we were using XLEAP, I had shared my screen, so it got recorded in the day one recording. So you can go back and look at that. But Cornell Wright also sent the report of what came out of that discussion. So everything that was on screen went into a report, and that'll be made available to everybody too.
Okay, who's next? I could present ours, or I could hold us for last.
I can go. I was a moderator for group 6.
Great, thank you, Whitney.
Yeah, so we had a few people in our group that weren't necessarily in the DE&I space and felt like their company didn't necessarily have a lot of programs. So we focused a lot on that second question of what can you bring, or what is one way you can bring these learnings back. And we focused about asking questions. So since, the group didn't have a lot of people in the DE&I space, there weren't a lot of answers of whether or not there are inclusion programs at work. Is there a DE&I department that's just not, properly promoted? What is there? So the first step, everyone really wanted to focus on was ask questions, maybe specifically on inclusion. Like, what do we do to build inclusion at work? What does that look like? Do we have a program? We do have a program. Great. How can we promote it better? We don't have a program. Okay. What can we do to build a program? What kind of questions do we want to ask? What is our culture? What do we want our culture to be? So that was where we focused a lot on the building piece. And included in that, we discussed that 30-day interview that I had brought up a little bit more, and how maybe to implement that in that process to help increase inclusion and make the process better, since it seemed like there wasn't a lot of understanding about what the process even was to start in the company. So to get more visibility on that. And then we talked about community outreach. So something that one of the people in my group is doing currently that we didn't really talk a lot about here was working with the community and using maybe bilingual services to engage and bring more customers and more clients in, and more employees in through that outreach process. And they had a really interesting community outreach program in their community where they would go around and hang up flyers and kind of personally create some bilingual opportunities to see what they could do to bring more people in the door. So that was more grassroots, feet on the ground, going out and hanging up flyers piece, but also something that can be really effective depending on how many positions you have, the type of community that you're in. So I thought that was a really good one too. And that was our 2 key takeaways.
And if it's okay, I'd love to kind of step up with our group. We had an example come up that was also about creating connection with community. And that was that sometimes you don't have the tools to create direct connection to the individuals in community. But if you go looking for community-based organizations that are already getting that information and create the relationship with that community group, it was something that one of the organizations in our group was doing. And I'm going to check in with Linda real quick. If would you be willing to report out our key takeaways from our group?
Okay. And so I think we talked about bringing some of the ideas back from this conference, because there were a lot of resources that we were given, and then even looking at some of the presenters and how the other companies are doing things, we can take those lessons and we can use that and incorporate it into the various companies that are represented here, their diversity and inclusion programs. And then another thing is in the recruitment efforts, like Jose, I believe, mentioned yesterday, like we need to look at those position descriptions and really make sure that the requirements that we're listing for the position, are they really needed to do the job effectively? And if we can get rid of some of those requirements, but still keep the essential functions of the job, then we can get more people in those jobs. And then also just kind of having a plan from A to Z, because yes, it's important for us to recruit people, but you have to have a plan in place once they're there to keep them. And so if we do those things, then I think this training will be well worth it.
Cherish Changala, did I pronounce that right?
Yes. So yeah, thank you. And for everyone in our group, definitely that whole, meeting people where they are was something we discussed quite a bit, and how important that is. And being able, Mara, what you had discussed again about how people receive information and how they want to have information is important. Maybe we're used to doing it a certain way or want to do it a certain way because that makes it comfortable for us, but taking that with us. We did discuss at the very beginning how within perhaps where we're working, the type of job we have, is the constraints and being able to make some of these adjustments, just in how positions are being categorized and how difficult that can be and how time consuming that can be. Even if someone wants to do that, they have to kind of go through the bureaucracy before that's allowed. So just how, how does that look in the future? But that was definitely a challenge that we heard about. And some exciting things were just what companies are doing to really to make some movement. So we'd heard from someone talking about bringing experts in different backgrounds and really educating the team about that, and really educating, not just surface level, just really understanding different cultures and things, which is fantastic. We heard more about mentorship programs, that are just starting, and how much enthusiasm was around that. And also just a discussion about like playing the race card, as it was called, and a discussion around how to be really honest about things that are going on and what does that mean for the organization and just in general. So definitely these resources will be great to take back for the team, Marianne, and have in a place that everyone can really have, and then share back with our group. So anyone else in the group, if you want to say anything else, that's just a quick recap. So, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I was in group 3, and we primarily focused on questions 1 and 2, but really echoing a lot of what many individuals have already kind of spoken about. We talked about the power of words and how changing the words that we use to get the message across in a more positive way might be really important, especially as we do consider the job descriptions, as we consider job requirements, kind of through this updated diversity, equity, inclusion kind of lens, or diversifying our workforce kind of lens. We also talked about how, reflecting on these last 2 days, we may have noticed that the way that we've approached our work, we're very comfortable in the way that we do things. Some things may even be prescriptive, but being open to doing things differently, being more open-minded and identifying ways to do that, especially when we're engaging with our employees, our team members. We talked about how, a takeaway from, these sessions and kind of applying it to specific organizations might look like having more staff meetings, more opportunities where we do engage in a collaborative way with our team members, with the employees within our organizations to get feedback, insights, perspectives on various different things. And I think that kind of brings up, the perspective or the truth that diversity is more than just, the color of our skin. There's diversity within perspective as well, among other things. And so with that in mind, that collaboration piece is something that was really important. We also talked about, really, because many of the individuals within these sessions or participating within these sessions may not necessarily focus on DE&I as a norm within their organization or every day. So having NERC provide the resources and also even, tangible ways or recommendations for how we could apply the learnings from these sessions to, attendees within within this conference would also be really important, just so that they're kind of hearing, tangibly, what are ways that we can do this based on recommendation as a starting point. And then last but not least, we focused on the fact that integrating DEI into the work that we do is not something that can happen all in a day or by tomorrow. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And so I think being kind to ourselves, but also leaning into the hard work, the tough conversations is something that we should reflect on, own, but still embrace the challenge as well. So those are the takeaways for group 3. Group 3, anyone else who'd like to kind of speak to those pieces as well, please do.
Thank you. I guess it's down to you and me, Megan.
Yeah, I think, we also talked about that element of being willing to experience discomfort so that you can grow and gain the different perspectives of your team members and how critical that is. Other groups already mentioned this, but we also really dug into what are the different ways that one can diversify their recruiting process, including the job description as well as the interview process itself. Or in some cases, you know, we heard an example of where for entry-level positions, they're not even doing interviews at all. And so it was really interesting to learn about the different, you know, maybe pros and cons to different models and examples of those. And, you know, one thing I love too that someone else had brought to the table was a term that their organization's starting to use, which is culture add instead of culture fit, to denote, yeah, that there's new perspectives are good, and you don't always necessarily want people that think the same way. I think those were probably the biggest key takeaways, but I invite anyone else to share if I missed something.
All right, thanks, Megan. Well, our group started off with the list of questions, but we also made a decision to kind of let the conversation stay organic. And it was obvious, you know, early on that we just wanted to elect Quest as a scapegoat and put all of the blame for the organization squarely on his shoulders. No, I'm joking. Actually, the opposite came up again and again, that people said, several people, starting with Naomi Manahan, mentioned the don't call people out, call people in. Rachel Proman from our RRS also brought up several other new language and lexicon things that she was taking away from the conference that she didn't have before. Quest, you know, made the point that being inclusive and positive is a multiplier, not a divider, and that by making it a positive, hey, we're here to make progress, we're here to grow. He thinks is a great morale booster in anyone's business or organization. Several people acknowledged the Schnitzer presentation. Quest and Paige particularly said, don't reinvent the wheel. You know, if you find an organization like Schnitzer's that's really put together a great TED Talk, just take that back with you. Naomi also called that out positively. Paige said that metrics are important, you know, trying to keep up with the progress that you are making, especially over years and years, you know, not necessarily over months. You don't want to have a culture of just everybody's exercised and all blessed now, that by having, you know, hiring measures monitored over a longer period of time, that you build those metrics. She also shared two websites that I'll post in the chat. One, Belonging Weekly Practice Guide from Berkeley University, and the other organization at www.asyousow.org, which we all appreciated. Rachel brought up some discussions about what inclusivity means for a mostly remote company when you're not meeting each other face to face. And I hadn't thought of that. I thought it was a great thing to discuss.
Yeah.
And, you know, lastly, you know, I just said that progress has been made. There's no denying that. You don't want people not to recognize when progress is being made, but that I made the analogy that it's a lot like safety culture. You know, when Good Point Recycling hired its first employees back in 2001, they were 18-year-olds who thought they were 10 foot tall and bulletproof and constantly getting injured and not following any of the safety instructions. You know, that we went from there to, okay, we're going to have a safety meeting, getting everybody into the cafeteria where a lot of people are just, you know, with their arms crossed, being talked at. but that as long as you keep committing to a more safe culture in the organization, you eventually evolve other things. Like today, any employee can open up a safety, it's called an incident report, something that they saw or are concerned about. And we've got a process where other employees, management can't delete or tear that up. That's got to be accessible to other employees. And I started wondering if, something like that might not be a way to incorporate some of the lessons from this conference. Anybody else from our group? I forget anything?
No, that was a good summary. I can just add that, yeah, we are really learning about how to kind of handle DEI in a remote, or not handle, but like make it as meaningful and effective. Our outreach efforts. I'm on like my company's DEI committee in a remote workplace, and if others have ideas, I'd be totally welcome to hear them, because it is kind of a unique environment. For instance, like people have mentioned, like mode of communication. If we're doing a lot of email and like Teams messages, you might not understand someone's tone and all that. We do a lot of video calls though.
Great, thank you. So Marianne, where do we go from here? Unmute.
I was saying, I hope we all go someplace good. I think that this was a great 2 afternoons of great conversation. I so appreciate everyone for being part of the conversations and not just sitting back, but really participating in the sessions. I know I've learned a lot. I wanted to let you know that we will, the evaluation link has been posted in the chat. Once you fill out the evaluation, a link to the presentations and the recordings will be shared with you. So I encourage you all to do that. And I look forward to continue working on issues like what we've discussed today in the future, both for NERC internally as well as an organization and what we provide to our constituency. And I'd love to learn more about what you all are doing. So if you have the time to do so, please share it with me. I would greatly appreciate it and pass it on to others. And I want to thank our DE&I committee, many of whom are on this call right now, who really worked hard at developing the agenda and identifying the speakers and just helping me to pull it all together. And I couldn't have done it without you. I thank you all very much for that. And we will be holding our fall conference in person this time, and it'll be held in Providence, Rhode Island. It'll be the first or second week in November, and we invite you all to join us for that. More information as it becomes available will be sent out to everyone, so just keep an eye out for that. And thank you all so much for being part of this. Thank you to our sponsors for helping us be able to present this to you. Have a great rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you in person in November. Have a great night.
You take care.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marianne.
We'll discuss this.
Thank you.